up guys, Davenator1, 2, and 2, and it's list day. Lists are always fun because if I'm on a weekend and I got a little extra time, they let me talk about a broader range of topics as opposed to just what's new, because basically standing up here on YouTube and being a news anchor for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's kind of boring. So I like to do cool, other fun, interesting stuff. Today's list is actually going to be useful to you guys if you're building decks because it gives you some ideas of what you can put into your deck in order to augment its power. Because today's list is my top 5 favorite splashable engines in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, before we start, I should probably define what an engine in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, otherwise you're not going to know what the hell I'm talking about if you don't know. Duh. Basically, an engine is exactly what it sounds like. It makes something go. And most of the time when referring to an engine in Yu-Gi-Oh! We were talking about a small group of cards that accomplish a task, and they're kind of self-sufficient and don't rely on the rest of the deck to move. They accomplish a goal, whether it's adding a rank 3 option to your warrior deck so you have access to MX Saber Invoker, or you add Fire King Island and a Fire King monster to your Cosmos so you can destroy cards in your hand. Either way, they're small, compact little engines that help the deck move or do something that it may or may not be able to do very well on its own. With that being said, the only rule for today is they have to be kind of meta relevant because otherwise, I'm just talking out my ass. But anyway guys, let's get started. First up we have is Zodiacs at number 5. Now, they could probably be number 1 if we were ranking these by power. However, I'm not. I'm ranking them by how much I give a damn. However, Zodiacs are extremely good and it would be criminal not to include them on the list in some capacity. The interesting thing about Zodiacs are they can make Xyz plays even if they only have one monster on board as long as that monster is a Zodiac. They all have varied effects, and none of them are particularly defensive, but they do let you push for OTKs, and you can keep stacking and getting power boosts and shuffle them around, and there's some interesting combos you can do with the deck. But the card I'm actually going to discuss in any capacity is Zodiac Trident. Trident is probably one of their best Xyz because it includes the effect, once per turn during another player's turn, you can destroy one face-up card on the field. Holy crap. Surprisingly, a quick effect just to simply pop a card and have very little restrictions on what that card actually is not something we have very widely in Yu-Gi-Oh! We have things like Buster Dragon, which lets you do a banish card once per turn, but just a plain quick effect to just pop a card, that's kind of rare still, somehow. So it's a really interesting effect, and if you have this thing next to a more defensive thing like Toad or Crystal Wing or some other broken bullshit, your opponent's going to have an absolute nightmare of a time dealing with your board unless they just have a handful of kaijus or something. Because they're going to negate something and then they're going to pop whatever else you had left. It's just a nightmare to deal with. And it's probably why this engine is going to be meta for a while. Pros for this engine are, basically, they're extremely powerful, easily splashable, and they can actually be a deck on their own if you play enough of them. Especially things with like Fire Fist support like Tanky makes the deck more consistent and honestly really good. However, they do have some cons. At the time of this recording, they only have one print and it's in Raging Tempest and they're absurdly expensive. So if you're looking to play a budget deck and you want to boost its power level, this would not be the way to do it. Number 4 is Artifacts. Artifacts are probably the strangest engine on this list because they're technically monsters, but they don't really play like that. They're more of a back row engine than anything else because they have the sole distinction of being played as trap cards face down in the spell and trap zone. When they are destroyed, they summon themselves to the field, and if they're summoned to the field during your opponent's turn, they get some effects. As a control engine, most of their effects are either stunny or deal with card advantage. Morale-Tech pops a card on the field, Scythe prevents your opponent from special summoning from their extra deck, and Lancia prevents players from banishing cards. There's other ones, but these are probably the 3 that you're mostly likely going to use and most likely going to see because they're probably the best. Your opponent is probably not going to just start blindly twin twistering you once they see that you have artifacts, so you do have their trap card artifact Sanctum. Sanctum is essentially a way to force them to work by summoning one from your deck, and if you choose to do this on your opponent's turn, you will get that monster's effect. And if your opponent tries to snipe the Sanctum, it has its own effect when it's destroyed by a card effect in order to pop another card. Never has there been an engine in Yu-Gi-Oh! That punishes the blind MST more than artifacts. The pros for this engine are they can be played pretty small, they're not going to take up a humongous part of your deck, and they're relatively inexpensive because they've all had reprints at this point. They're lower rarity, I think super rare or Sanctum's an ultra, but you don't need to play their spells. Okay. However, the cons for them make them only usable in certain decks. in that they are a bunch of level 5 light fairies. Sure, they give you some interesting extra deck access for synchro or seed plays. However, if you absolutely desperately need a monster to normal summon, you are not going to be doing that because they all require a tribute if you wanted to. Overall, they're a really decent little engine and they make some cool decks. Give them a try. Next up, we have Brilliant Fusion, or the Brilliant Fusion engine, I guess. Brilliant Fusion is an amazing card, and it's kind of silly that Gem Knights aren't a tier 1 deck, even though they're actually pretty good, because everyone else is using their cards and abusing their cards, and they only marginally use it well. And that's because you normally pair your Brilliant Fusion with Gem Knight Seraphonite, which is, again, I'm pretty sure they don't play very often. Seraphonite is an amazing fusion monster that bestows you an extra normal summon during your turn. Sure, Brilliant Fusion brings her out with like no stats whatsoever, but you don't care. You play her in defense mode, and then you get all the normal summons you could ever want for this turn. And unlike Polymerization, Brilliant Fusion has an amazing way of paying its cost. Instead of ditching cards from your hand or your field like Poly does, it ditches them from your deck. Yep, a fusion card that lets you mill 2. Ah, it's perfect. Basically, you need to mill the fusion material listed on Seraphonite, which is 1 Gem Knight monster and 1 light monster. Normally, people use Gem Knight Garnet because it's a giant vanilla 1900 beat stick, but you can use Lazuli because it does have a neat little resurrection effect. But the most important thing is that little light monster requirement. There is some really good light monsters, and there's some really good light monsters that would love to be milled out of your deck to the graveyard. Trick Clown, one of them. It's a great way to get just a little bit more extra advantage. It's super trolly. Pros for this engine are it's relatively inexpensive. Brilliant Fusion's got a reprint. It was only ever a super rare anyway, so you probably get away with 3 copies for $5 a piece. Seraphonite's about the same price, and there you go. That's all you need. Sure, I guess you need a Garnet too, but you could really throw any stupid Gem Knight in your deck that you want if you're trying to save money. I'm sure you have one somewhere in a tin. And your deck's probably full of light monsters if you're considering this. If not, Trick Clown is a great option, and he was a con. The biggest con for this engine, however, is you can brick. It behooves you not to run too many Garnets or too many Lazulis, because otherwise you're going to draw into them, and that's ass. But even at 1, you may still open your Garnet. Yuck. Unless, of course, you're playing Spirals, and your Resort can put the Garnet back in the deck. That's really good. Overall, really small engine. Requires an extra deck spot, but sometimes that's okay because it's less in your main deck, and it's relatively inexpensive. Next up, we have Instant Fusion, which, side note, actually combos really well with your Brilliant Fusion engine, so just keep that in mind. Instant Fusion is an amazing engine for a deck because all it requires is 1 card for your main deck, and that's Instant Fusion. Yeah, you'd probably play 3 copies of it, but you don't need tons of commitment in order for it to work. What does it do? Well, Instant Fusion lets you summon for 1,000 light points any level 5 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck as long as it doesn't tell you it can't, which I think only applies to, like, those Neo-Spatian things. Maybe, I don't know, don't quote me on that. But we don't care about that, we care about what you can summon, and there's some brilliant targets for this. The first one that comes to mind is Norden, or Elder Entity Norden if you want the full name. He's a level 4 water fairy, I think, and when he hits the field, it doesn't matter what he is. When he hits the field, he summons a level 4 or lower monster from your extra deck. Is it level 4 or lower? It is level 4 or lower. Normally you get a level 4, so I actually couldn't remember. Sure, it negates its effect, but who really cares? You're making an Exceed play with this. So basically, you paid 1,000 light points to make Lightning or Castel or... Oh, I wish we could make the Volval chain still. But yeah, you get the point. It's a free Exceed play. However, Norden's not the only target you got. You also have Panzer Dragon, which is a level 5 light machine monster, so you have all the Nova into Infinity plays you could want. Also, Instant Fusion kills the monster it summons during the end phase, and that activates Panzer's effect in order to destroy 1 card. So at worst, if you have Panzer Dragon in your extra deck, your Instant Fusion turns into MST. That's alright. You also have Thousand Eyes Restrict, an oldie but a goodie, still a decent card. He's been on the ban list for years now, but we finally can actually use him, and he's actually really good. You can target 1 card your opponent controls and equip it to this thing as an equip spell, and he gains the stats of whatever the monster was that he grabbed. But he can't attack because of Instant Fusion, but we really don't care because it's a great little instant spot removal for $1,000. Next, but not least, is the newest edition, and it's not El Shadal Winda, even though you could summon El Shadal Winda, it would just die. If you could bring it back, that's a decent little lock there, but is Sea Monster of Theseus. He just came out, great. He's another water, but he's a level 5 zombie tuner. He is the first tuner target for Instant Fusion, and because he's so new, we haven't figured out all the cool combos you can do with him, but being a water and a zombie means you can get him back. Instant Fusion is considered a proper fusion summon, so you can use things like Call the Haunted to get monsters back that you played with it. And the fact that he's a water and a zombie gives you all the infinite... You just have tons of cards you can use to keep recycling Theseus once you get him out of the extra deck. And because he's a level 5 tuner, like I said earlier, it combos very well with Brilliant Fusion because you can make Seraphonite next to him and then go into Ultimaya Zulkin and then set a card and summon your Crystal Wing. So you got that cool little interaction between the two engines. Pros for this engine, it's extremely easy to put in a main deck because it's just as many copies of Instant Fusion as you want, up to 3. And you can put as many of the package in your extra deck as you can fit. So maybe it's just one Norden, or Norden and Panzer, or Norden and Theseus, or all 3 of them. Stick Winda in there if you want, who cares? You have tons of options to cater this to your deck to make it do what you want it to do. Hell, you can even put things like Rare Fish or Flame Ghost in your extra deck if your deck needs that monster to make Exceed or Synchro plays. As far as cons are concerned, I guess Nord and Theseus are kind of pricey last time I checked. And not every deck can utilize it to do anything. You wouldn't play this in Cleese probably, so that's a thing I guess. But overall, it's probably one of the best splashable engines we have. Before I get to number 1, I have an honorable mention, and it's Tour Guide from the Underworld. Oh, Tour Guide, rest in peace. Ye will be missed. The ban list absolutely shreked this poor girl. She is now at 1, which essentially makes her a useless or very limited in use. She still can be used in Burning Abyss because she can summon pretty much every monster in the deck. However, as an engine that's splashable and other things, she's less than ideal now. However, that doesn't change the fact that she was extremely good for an extremely long time and probably the best rank 3 engine we had until we got number 1. At number 1, we have the Speedroid engine. Oh my god, they are fantastic. The Speedroid engine normally consists of Terratop, Take Tomborg, and maybe a Red-Eyed Dice if you're feeling adventurous and want to play Synchro. But mostly you're playing just 3 copies of Terratop and the 1 copy of Take Tomborg to go into rank 3 plays. What made Tour Guide an honorable mention, but Speedroid's number 1, was the fact that you don't need your normal summon. When you normal summon Tour Guide, you can special summon 1 level 3 Fiend from your deck. Normally, you'd probably go into another Tour Guide if it wasn't at 1. Or a Skarm, I guess. But that uses a normal summon. If you don't control any monsters, Terratop lets you just special summon itself from your hand. And when it hits the field, it searches Take Tomborg. And because you have a Speedroid on board, Take Tomborg can special summon itself. Meaning you now have the option to make pretty much any rank 3 monster you want, including Totem Bird, which is a little interesting note. And Totem Bird's actually really good. If you're playing this in Zodiacs, you can go into your MX Saber Invoker, which I had mentioned, I think. Which means this engine can combo really well with your Zodiac engine. And you haven't even used a normal summon yet. Pros for this engine pretty much come down to, it's all relatively inexpensive. Terratop's not super cheap, but it's about right for what it is. It doesn't use your normal summon, and it's only 4 cards, which means it's not a humongous commitment for your main deck. I guess the cons would be, not every deck can utilize it very well. Some decks don't really need to go into a rank 3 play to do anything special, and it would just be a kind of superfluous win more move just to make an extra monster that doesn't actually do anything to forward your playstyle. Also, for budget players, it might be too much, especially because one of the most useful targets for it is, frankly, MX Saber Invoker, and Invoker is like absurd right now because it's never got a reprint, and it's a really, really, really good card. Overall, a fantastic splashable engine, and let's hope it doesn't get hit in the ban list because poor, pure Speedroid decks would be so sad that everyone spoiled their fun. Alright guys, that was the list. This was a fun one to do and hopefully kind of useful for you guys who are actually building decks and want some ideas on how to make their deck move a little better. Anyway guys, let me know in the comments below what your favorite splashable engine is, and remember guys, if you don't troll the meta, who will? I'll see you guys next time.